Sometimes the most dangerous predators are awakened not by threats to themselves, but by the cries of the innocent. The humid Miami air hung thick as molasses that July evening when Isabella Bella Morales sat cleaning her. Special in the marble-floored study of her Coral Gables fortress. For 15 years, she'd been the Medellin cartel's most feared enforcer, a woman who could make grown men weep with a single glance. But when little Carmen Vasquez crashed through her front door, tears streaming down her dirt-stained cheeks, screaming about men hurting her mama, something long dormant stirred in Bella's chest, a maternal rage she'd buried since watching her own mother's brutal death decades ago. What Bella didn't know was that this crying child would unravel everything she thought she understood about loyalty, family, and survival in the cocaine wars that were tearing Miami apart. As she methodically prepared to hunt down the men who dared harm a child's mother in her neighborhood, federal surveillance teams watched from hidden positions, wondering if their most elaborate undercover operation was about to succeed, or if they'd just awakened a sleeping demon who would show them why they called her La Sombra. Could an 8-year-old girl really be the key to bringing down Miami's most untouchable queenpin? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hook. The child's sobs echoed through the marble hallway like gunshots in a cathedral. Bella set down her weapon with the same deliberate precision she used for everything. A ritual born from 15 years of staying alive in a business where hesitation meant death. The cloth squares she'd been using to clean the .38 lay scattered across her mahogany desk like surrender flags, but Isabella Morales had never surrendered to anything. "Ma'am, please," the little girl's voice cracked with desperation. "They're hurting her real bad." Bella studied the child, maybe 8 years old, with wild curls escaping from 2 uneven pigtails and a faded strawberry shortcake t-shirt that had seen better days. Dirt streaked her brown legs, and one of her sneakers had a hole near the big toe. Nothing about Carmen Vasquez suggested wealth or connections. Just another kid from the working-class families that had somehow managed to cling to this corner of Coral Gables despite the gentrification creeping through Miami like rising floodwater. Where? Bella's voice came out rougher than she intended. She cleared her throat, trying to access something softer, a maternal tone she'd buried so deep she wasn't sure it still existed. Next door, the yellow house with the broken fence. Carmen wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a shiny trail across her wrist. "There's 3 of them and they got badges, but they ain't acting like no police I ever seen." Badges. The word hit Bella like ice water in her veins. She moved to the window, her bare feet silent against the cool marble. Through the bulletproof glass, she could see the Vasquez house, a modest single story that had always seemed oddly well-maintained for a family that supposedly struggled to make rent. The yard was dark, but she caught the glint of chrome from what looked like an unmarked sedan parked in the shadows of an ancient oak tree. Federal agents conducting a raid would explain the badges, but it wouldn't explain why they were beating a woman in front of her child, or why that child had been able to escape to seek help, unless... Bella's fingers traced the scar along her left temple, a nervous habit from her early days in the trade, when paranoia had been the difference between promotion and a shallow grave in the Everglades. The scar was a souvenir from her first interrogation, courtesy of a DEA agent who'd been convinced she knew more about her handler's cocaine routes than she actually did. She'd been 19 then, barely older than Carmen was now, and just as terrified. "Carmen, how long have you and your mama lived next door?" 6 months, ma'am. We moved here from Hialeah after Mama got her new job." The girl's eyes darted toward the window, then back to Bella's face. "She works real hard, cleans offices downtown. We ain't never bothered nobody." 6 months. Bella's network had briefed her about new neighbors as a matter of course, part of the security protocols that had kept her breathing in a business where life expectancy was measured in years, not decades. But somehow the Vasquez family had slipped through those checks, an oversight that now felt like a neon sign flashing trap in her peripheral vision. The rational part of her mind, the part that had earned her the nickname La Sombra, whispered warnings. This was too convenient, too perfect. A crying child, a mother in distress, federal agents who might or might not be what they seemed. Every instinct she'd honed told her to grab her go-bag, slip out through the tunnel that connected her basement to the storm drain system, and disappear into the maze of Miami's underworld until she could sort truth from fiction. But Carmen's tears weren't theoretical. Neither was the fear radiating from her small body like heat from pavement. And somewhere in Bella's chest, in a place she'd thought was dead and buried, something stirred. A memory of her own mother's voice, calling her Mija while braiding her hair before school. The memory of that same voice screaming, cut short by gunfire when rival dealers decided to send a message about territory and respect. Bella had been 10 when it happened. Only 2 years older than Carmen was now. "Stay here," she said, moving toward the wall safe hidden behind a reproduction Picasso. A gift from a grateful client who'd needed someone to disappear permanently. "Don't touch anything, don't answer the phone. And if anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you run to the kitchen and hit the red button under the counter." Carmen nodded solemnly, as if emergency protocols were a normal part of childhood. Maybe, in her world, they were. Bella's fingers flew across the safe's digital keypad, muscle memory guiding her through the combination. Inside, nestled between stacks of cash and fake passports, lay her working tools, a silenced Glock, ceramic knives that wouldn't trigger metal detectors, and a small leather pouch containing items that could make grown men beg for death. Tonight, someone was going to answer for making a little girl cry. Bella paused with the Glock halfway to her shoulder holster, struck by the absurdity of the moment. Here she was, arming herself to rescue strangers based on the word of a child she'd met 5 minutes ago. It violated every principle that had kept her alive in this business. Principles written in blood and carved deeper with each betrayal she'd witnessed. The smart play was obvious: wait for morning, make some calls, verify the Vasquez family's background through her contacts in immigration and local law enforcement. By tomorrow afternoon, she'd know Carmen's shoe size and her mother's maiden name. But the girl's hiccuping, sobs, filled the silence like an accusation, and Bella found herself checking the Glock's magazine with the same methodical precision she'd use for any other job. 15 years. That's how long it had been since Isabella Morales had made an impulsive decision. The last time was in Medellin, when she'd chosen to warn a rival family's daughter about a contract on her father's head. The gesture had earned her 3 enemies, 2 scars, and a reputation for unpredictability that she'd spent years living down. Since then, every choice had been calculated, every risk assessed, every emotion locked away like the weapons in her safe. But Carmen wasn't just any child. She was 8 years old and asking for help, and that combination bypassed every defense mechanism Bella had constructed like water finding cracks in concrete. "You got any other family?" Bella asked, sliding ceramic blades into the hidden sheath sewn into her black cargo pants. "Daddy, grandparents, anybody who might come looking for you?" Carmen shook her head, curls bouncing. "Just Mama and me. Daddy went away when I was little," she said it matter-of-factly, the way kids adapted to harsh truths by making them ordinary. "Just like me and Mama." The thought surfaced unbidden. Bella's father had been a ghost even before the bullets found him, another casualty of the drug wars that had consumed Colombia in the 70s. Her mother, Elena, had raised her alone in the slums of Medellin until the violence followed them to Miami, where they'd thought they could disappear into the anonymity of immigrant poverty. They'd been wrong. Bella checked her watch, 2:47 a.m. In 3 hours, she was supposed to meet with Rodriguez about the new trafficking routes through the port of Miami. By 8, she needed to be in Hialeah, collecting tribute from the street dealers who sold under her protection. At noon, she had a consultation with a client whose business partner had developed an unfortunate tendency toward cooperation with federal investigators. It was a typical Tuesday in the life of La Sombra, a carefully orchestrated dance of violence and commerce that generated enough money to fund small countries and enough fear to keep her competitors at a respectful distance. She'd built this empire one calculated risk at a time, trading pieces of her humanity for power and protection, until she'd become something more legend than woman. The mansion around her was proof of that transformation. 8 bedrooms she never used, because sleep required trust she couldn't afford. A kitchen stocked with food she barely tasted, because meals were just fuel between jobs. Art on the walls chosen by designers who understood aesthetics, but not the irony of surrounding herself with beauty while trafficking in death. She told herself it was enough: the money, the respect, the knowledge that she'd climbed higher in the cartel hierarchy than any woman before her. She'd survived long enough to see rivals die of old age, overdoses, and federal indictments. In a business where most careers ended in morgues or prison cells, longevity was its own kind of victory. But standing in her sterile palace at 3 a.m, watching a little girl wipe her nose on a cartoon character shirt, Bella felt the weight of what she'd sacrificed. No children calling her mama. No one to braid pigtails for or read bedtime stories to. No one who would remember her as anything other than a cautionary tale whispered in the shadows. Carmen looked up at her with eyes that held too much fear for 8 years on Earth, and Bella saw herself 3 decades ago, terrified, alone, and praying for someone strong enough to make the bad men go away. "Ma'am, you coming?" Carmen's voice was smaller now, as if she'd sensed Bella's hesitation and interpreted it as abandonment. Bella holstered the Glock and pulled on a black tactical vest. "Yeah, mija, I'm coming." The endearment slipped out without permission, carrying the weight of buried dreams and roads not taken. But as she moved toward the door, Bella realized that for the first time in 15 years, she wasn't thinking about survival or strategy or the careful maintenance of fear that kept her world spinning. She was thinking about a little girl who needed someone to chase away the monsters, and how desperately she wanted to be worthy of that trust, even if it killed her. The motion sensors activated as they stepped into the humid Miami night, bathing the front courtyard in harsh white light. Bella instinctively moved into the shadows, pulling Carmen behind her, a reflex so automatic she didn't realize she'd done it until she felt the girl's small hand clutch at her vest. "Turn off the lights, ma'am," Carmen whispered urgently. "They'll see us coming." Bella paused, studying the child's face in the artificial glow. There was something unsettling about an 8-year-old who understood tactical considerations, who thought about sight lines and approach vectors. Most kids Carmen's age would be crying, clinging, begging to call the police. Instead, she was giving operational advice. "How do you know about that?" "Mama taught me. She said sometimes bad people watch houses, and you gotta be smart about when they can see you." Carmen's voice carried a matter-of-fact tone that made Bella's skin crawl. What kind of life had this child lived that such lessons were necessary? Bella pulled out her phone and disabled the motion sensors. Darkness wrapped around them like a familiar embrace, broken only by the distant streetlights and the yellow glow spilling from the Vasquez house windows. From here, she could see movement inside. Shadows passing behind thin curtains, the unmistakable silhouettes of multiple figures. "Where exactly did you see your mama last?" Bella kept her voice low, professional, the same tone she'd use when gathering intelligence before a hit. "Living room. They had her on the floor by the couch." Carmen pointed toward the front window. "I was supposed to be sleeping, but I heard the yelling and came out to look. How did you get out without them seeing you?" "Back door. Mama always keeps it unlocked in case." Carmen stopped abruptly, as if she'd almost revealed something she shouldn't have. Another alarm bell. Bella knew enough about domestic security to recognize patterns. Single mothers living in decent neighborhoods didn't typically maintain multiple escape routes unless they had reason to expect trouble, and they definitely didn't teach their children evasion techniques unless the sound of breaking glass cut through the night air, followed by a woman's scream. Every maternal instinct Bella had buried roared to life, but beneath that surge of protective fury, her tactical mind continued its cold analysis. The timing was too perfect. The scream came exactly when she would be close enough to hear it, positioned where she'd feel compelled to act. If this was a setup, it was being executed with surgical precision. "Mama!" Carmen started forward, but Bella caught her arm. "No. You stay behind me, you stay quiet, and if I tell you to run, you run back to my house and hit that red button. Understand?" Carmen nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Real tears, Bella noted. Whatever else was happening here, the child's fear was genuine. They moved across the manicured lawn separating the properties, Bella's bare feet silent on the cool grass. She could smell jasmine from Mrs. Chen's garden 2 houses down, mixed with the salt tang of the nearby bay and something else, the metallic scent of blood carried on the night breeze. As they reached the side of the Vasquez house, Bella pressed herself against the stucco wall and risked a look through the living room window. What she saw made her blood freeze. A woman, presumably Carmen's mother, lay motionless on the carpet, her dark hair spread in a fan around her head. Standing over her were two men in tactical gear, and a third figure crouched beside the body, checking for a pulse. Their movements were professional, controlled, not the chaotic violence of street thugs or even dirty cops shaking down civilians. These men moved like federal agents, or like very expensive contractors. "Is that your mama?" Bella whispered, though she already knew the answer from Carmen's sharp intake of breath. "They killed her," Carmen whispered, her voice empty of everything except a devastating adult comprehension. They really killed her. But as Bella watched, the woman's chest rose and fell, unconscious, not dead, and something about the scene felt staged, too clean, too visible through the unobstructed window, as if someone wanted her to see exactly this tableau. The choice crystallized in front of her with absolute clarity. She could walk away, take Carmen back to her house, make some calls, let professionals sort out whatever federal operation was playing out next door. It was the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that wouldn't compromise 15 years of careful neutrality with law enforcement. Or she could go in. Trust her instincts over her paranoia. Save a woman who might or might not be what she seemed, for a child who had stumbled into her life carrying secrets Bella couldn't yet decode. The third man looked up from the body and stared directly at the window where Bella crouched. For a heartbeat, their eyes met through the glass. He smiled, a cold expression that confirmed every suspicion crawling up her spine. Then he raised his radio to his lips. "Ma'am?" Carmen's voice was barely audible. "What do we do now?" Bella checked her weapons one final time and made the choice that would change everything. "Now, mija, we find out who's hunting who." The moment the words left her mouth, Bella felt the weight of 15 years of careful survival crashing down on her shoulders. She pressed her back against the stucco wall, her tactical vest suddenly feeling like it was made of lead instead of Kevlar. The rational part of her mind, the part that had kept La Sombra alive through 3 cartel wars and countless federal investigations, was screaming warnings so loud she could barely think. This was insanity. Pure, suicidal insanity. She closed her eyes and forced herself to catalog everything wrong with this situation. The timing of Carmen's arrival, the convenient positioning of the unconscious mother where she'd be visible through an unobstructed window, the way the federal agent, because that's what he was, she was certain now, had looked directly at her hiding spot with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where to find her. And Carmen. Sweet, terrified Carmen with her strawberry shortcake shirt and her tactical awareness that belonged on a grown operative, not an 8-year-old girl. Bella's fingers found the scar along her temple again, tracing the raised skin while her mind raced through possibilities. If this was a federal sting, walking into that house would be tantamount to suicide. Not the quick, clean death of a bullet. That would be a mercy. Federal custody meant interrogation, meant years of pressure to flip on the Medellin cartel, meant watching from a prison cell while her empire crumbled and her enemies divided up her territory like vultures picking at roadkill. But if it wasn't a sting... "Ma'am?" Carmen's whisper cut through her spiraling thoughts. The girl was pressed against the wall beside her, small body trembling with what looked like genuine terror. "They're gonna hurt her more. I can hear them talking." Bella strained to listen. Male voices drifted through the thin walls, professional, clipped conversations that sounded like tactical updates. She caught fragments: target acquired, proceed to phase 2, extraction point secured, military precision, federal terminology. Everything her paranoid mind had suspected, confirmed by the very evidence that should have sent her running back to her fortress. So why wasn't she moving? The answer hit her like a physical blow. She could see her mother's face in Carmen's features, the same wide eyes, the same way of biting her lower lip when afraid. Elena Morales had been 28 when the bullets found her, young enough to still believe the world might show mercy to a woman trying to protect her daughter. Bella had been hiding in the bathroom when it happened, pressed against the cold tiles while men with guns searched their tiny apartment for money that didn't exist. She'd listened to her mother beg, not for her own life, but for time. Time to say goodbye. Time to make sure her daughter would be safe. Time to whisper one last prayer in the language of their homeland. They'd given her 30 seconds. The memory surfaced with surgical precision, complete with sounds and smells that therapy had never managed to dull. The sharp crack of gunfire, the copper scent of blood, the sudden silence that meant she was alone in the world at 10 years old, with nothing but rage and the iron determination to never be that helpless again. She'd built an empire on that determination, turned herself into something so feared that grown men crossed themselves when they heard her name. La Sombra didn't save people, she eliminated them. La Sombra didn't rescue children, she created orphans. But standing in the darkness outside a stranger's house, feeling Carmen's small hand clutch at her vest, Bella realized she'd never actually chosen to become La Sombra. That transformation had been born from necessity, from the brutal calculus of survival in a world that devoured the weak. She told herself it was evolution, but maybe it had just been the longest, slowest suicide in cartel history. "What if they see us?" Carmen whispered, voicing the fear that was eating Bella alive. What if they see us? What if this is a trap? What if she'd finally let emotion override the cold logic that had kept her breathing for decades? What if she walked into that house and discovered that an 8-year-old girl had accomplished what the DEA, rival cartels, and her own paranoia never could, maneuvering La Sombra into a position where survival wasn't possible? Bella looked down at Carmen and saw herself 3 decades ago, desperate and alone and praying for someone strong enough to make the nightmare stop. She thought about the woman lying unconscious on that living room floor and wondered if Elena Morales would have lived if someone like La Sombra had been there to even the odds. The radio chatter from inside the house was getting more urgent. Whatever operation was unfolding, it was accelerating towards some kind of climax. In minutes, maybe seconds, she would lose the option to act. The smart choice, the safe choice, was retreating to her fortress and pretending she'd never met Carmen Vasquez. But as she reached for the girl's hand to lead her back to safety, Bella realized she was tired. Bone-deep, soul-crushing tired of being the monster in other people's stories. Maybe it was time to find out if she remembered how to be the hero. The decision hit Bella like a physical force, irrevocable as gravity. She turned to Carmen and pressed her satellite phone into the girl's small hands. "Listen to me very carefully, mija." Her voice carried the authority of 15 years commanding respect through violence, but softened with something she'd almost forgotten she possessed. "You're going back to my house. If I'm not out in 20 minutes, you call that number marked Rodriguez and tell him La Sombra needs extraction. Can you do that?" Carmen shook her head frantically. "I'm not leaving Mama." "Yes, you are." Bella gripped the girl's shoulders, forcing eye contact. "Because if this goes wrong, if they take me down, you're the only one who'll know what happened here. And someone needs to remember." The weight of that truth settled between them. For the first time since Elena's murder, Bella was walking into a situation where survival wasn't guaranteed, where her legendary instincts might not be enough, where the careful architecture of fear and respect she'd built around herself would mean nothing against federal badges and arrest warrants. She was about to cross a line she'd spent 15 years avoiding: direct confrontation with law enforcement. Every cartel operative knew the unwritten rules. You could buy cops, intimidate witnesses, even eliminate rivals, but you never, ever made yourself a priority target for federal agencies. The moment you did that, you stopped being a criminal and became a terrorist. The full weight of government resources would come crushing down until you were dead or disappeared. But as Bella looked at Carmen's tear-streaked face, she realized some lines were worth crossing. Go. Now. She watched Carmen disappear into the shadows, then turned toward the house with the cold focus that had made her reputation. No more Isabella Morales, frightened child hiding in bathrooms while her world burned. No more careful calculations about risk and reward. Tonight, she was walking into the unknown stripped of everything except the weapons on her body and a rage that had been building for 30 years. The back door stood slightly ajar, another detail that screamed setup. Bella approached it like she would any other kill house, checking angles, listening for movement patterns, mapping the tactical environment with professional precision. But beneath that familiar routine, something else pulsed in her blood. Something she'd buried so deep she'd forgotten its name. Hope. Hope that maybe, this once, she could be the person who stopped the nightmare instead of starting it. Hope that 30 years of accumulated violence might finally serve something besides her own survival. Hope that when this was over, she could look in the mirror and see something other than her mother's killer staring back. She slipped through the doorway into a kitchen that smelled like vanilla candles and fresh coffee, domestic normalcy that felt alien after years of sterile safe houses and blood-scented warehouses. Family photos covered the refrigerator. Carmen blowing out birthday candles, Carmen and her mother at the beach, Carmen in a school play costume that transformed her into a butterfly. A child's life, documented in magnetic framed moments. The kind of life Bella had never allowed herself to imagine, let alone live. Voices drifted from the front room, closer now. Professional exchanges punctuated by radio static and the occasional sharp command. She counted at least 4 distinct speakers, all male, all using the clipped terminology of federal operations. As she moved deeper into the house, ceramic blades sliding silently from their sheaths, Bella felt the familiar calm descend, the predator's focus that had carried her through hundreds of kills. But this was different. This time, she wasn't hunting for money or territory or the maintenance of fear. She was hunting to protect something precious and fragile and utterly beyond her experience. She paused at the threshold between kitchen and living room, gathering herself for whatever waited on the other side. Once she stepped through that doorway, there would be no retreat, no negotiation, no carefully constructed deniability. She would be committed to a path that led either to salvation or destruction, with no middle ground between them. For 15 years, La Sombra had been a ghost story, present in the aftermath, credited with impossibilities, but never witnessed in the moment of action. Tonight, that protection would evaporate. Tonight, she would be visible, vulnerable, and fighting for something that had nothing to do with profit or survival. Bella thought of Carmen's small hand clutching her vest, of Elena's whispered prayers that went unanswered, of all the moments when mercy had been absent and violence had been the only available language. Then she stepped into the light, ceramic blades catching the glow from overhead fixtures, and discovered who she really was when everything else was stripped away. The unknown had been waiting for her all along. It just looked different than she'd expected, less like an ending and more like a beginning. The living room spread before her like a crime scene frozen in amber, every detail hyper-vivid under the harsh fluorescent lights they'd brought in. The woman Bella had seen through the window, Carmen's mother, lay zip-tied on the carpet, conscious now but gagged, her dark eyes tracking the movements of her captors with the kind of alertness that confirmed Bella's worst suspicions. This wasn't a victim. This was an operative maintaining surveillance even while restrained. 4 men in tactical gear moved through the space with practiced efficiency, but they'd made the fatal mistake of assuming they were hunting a ghost. They'd positioned themselves for a siege, not an infiltration. Their weapons were slung, their attention focused on monitoring equipment spread across the dining table, surveillance feeds, communication arrays, and what looked like a detailed blueprint of her own house. The man who'd smiled at her through the window stood with his back turned, speaking quietly into a headset. Shadow is in play. Repeat, target has engaged. Phase 3 is go. Phase 3. Bella's tactical mind cataloged the implications while her body remained perfectly still in the doorway. This wasn't a rescue operation interrupted. This was an elaborate trap, and she'd walked directly into the center of it. Carmen's arrival at her door, the staged scene, the convenient timing. All of it designed to draw La Sombra out of her fortress and into a controlled environment. The woman on the floor, Agent Vasquez, not Elena Vasquez, caught sight of her and went completely rigid. Their eyes met across the room, and Bella saw something she hadn't expected, genuine fear. Not the calculated wariness of a federal operative facing a known threat, but the raw terror of a mother who just realized her daughter was in mortal danger. Because whatever these men had planned, Carmen wasn't supposed to be part of it. "Sir," one of the agents called from the surveillance station, his voice tight with sudden urgency. "We have a problem. The daughter isn't in the house. Thermal shows she's at the target's residence." The atmosphere in the room shifted like air pressure before a hurricane. The lead agent spun around, his professional composure cracking. "What do you mean she's not here? The whole operation depends on—" He stopped mid-sentence as he registered Bella standing in the doorway, ceramic blades reflecting the overhead lights like captured moonlight. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, predator and prey evaluated each other across the domestic battlefield they'd created. "Gentlemen," Bella said, her voice carrying the same conversational tone she'd used to order coffee that morning. "I believe you've been looking for me." The room exploded into motion. Weapons swung toward her as voices shouted commands, but Bella was already moving, 15 years of survival instincts compressed into fluid grace. The first blade found the throat of the communications operator before his rifle cleared its sling. The second took the surveillance tech center mass as he reached for his sidearm. But these weren't street thugs or corrupt cops. These were federal agents with training that almost matched her own. The remaining two had cover and clear lines of fire before she could reach them. "Stand down!" The lead agent's weapon tracked her movement, his finger tight on the trigger. "Isabella Morales, you're under arrest for conspiracy, drug trafficking, and murder in the first degree." Bella smiled, tasting copper where she'd bitten her tongue during the initial assault. "I think there's been a misunderstanding, Agent. Special Agent Davidson, DEA, and there's no misunderstanding. We've been watching you for 8 months. Every supplier, every shipment, every body you've buried in the Everglades." His voice carried the satisfaction of a man who'd finally cornered his obsession. "It's over, Shadow. The only question is whether you come quietly or we add resisting arrest to your charges." 8 months, Bella repeated, her mind racing through implications. 8 months meant they had evidence. Real evidence, not just surveillance and speculation. Which meant someone had turned. Someone close enough to her operation to provide the kind of intelligence that built federal cases. Rodriguez. The name hit her like a physical blow. Her most trusted lieutenant, the man she'd given Carmen's emergency contact number to less than 10 minutes ago. The one person who knew all her safe houses, all her suppliers, all her carefully constructed alibis. Agent Vasquez was making muffled sounds through her gag, her eyes wide with what looked like desperate communication. Not the struggle of a captive trying to escape, but the frantic gestures of someone trying to warn her about something. "Your little rescue mission is touching," Davidson continued, his weapon steady despite the bodies of his colleagues cooling on the hardwood floor. "But did you really think we wouldn't anticipate maternal instincts? The great La Sombra, brought down by an 8-year-old girl in a staged domestic violence call." The truth crystallized with brutal clarity. This had never been about Carmen's mother. It was about mapping Bella's psychological weaknesses, finding the one scenario that would make her abandon 30 years of careful paranoia. They'd studied her background, her history, her mother's murder, and crafted the perfect emotional manipulation. Carmen wasn't a victim. She was bait. And somewhere in her fortress, surrounded by weapons and security systems that would mean nothing against a federal warrant, a terrified child was about to become collateral damage in a war she never should have been part of. The weight of betrayal settled in Bella's chest like swallowed glass, but she couldn't afford the luxury of processing it. Not with Davidson's finger hovering over the trigger and Carmen alone in a house that was probably already surrounded. The girl had 20 minutes, maybe less if Rodriguez was feeding real-time intelligence to his federal handlers. "You made one mistake," Bella said, keeping her voice steady while calculating angles and distances. The ceramic blades in her hands felt weightless, extensions of will rather than weapons. "You assumed I came here for her." She gestured toward Agent Vasquez with one blade, watching Davidson's eyes track the movement. "But I didn't. I came here for you." The confession hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Davidson's tactical training warred with curiosity across his features. The eternal federal weakness of needing to understand the criminal mind even in the moment of capture. "Bullshit," he said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "You walked into an obvious setup to save a stranger's kid. That's not the calculating predator from our psychological profile." Bella laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Your profile was written by people who never understood what they were hunting. You think La Sombra is some apex predator, killing for pleasure or power, but shadows don't exist without light to cast them." She took a half-step forward, testing his nerve. The remaining agent, young, nervous, probably on his first major operation, shifted position behind an overturned couch, his breathing audible from across the room. Amateur. In a real firefight, He'd be dead before he could squeeze off a shot. "You want to know why I'm really here, Davidson? Because 8 months ago, someone started asking questions about Elena Morales, my mother." The words tasted like poison, but she forced them out. Someone was digging through old police files, immigration records, witness statements from a murder that happened 30 years ago in a neighborhood cops pretended didn't exist. Davidson's weapon never wavered, but she saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew. Of course he knew. Her mother's death was probably highlighted in yellow marker in whatever psychological assessment they'd commissioned. Someone decided my trauma was a weakness to exploit instead of a wound to respect. Someone thought an 8-year-old girl was acceptable collateral in their career-building arrest. The temperature in her voice dropped to Arctic levels. So I started hunting the hunter. Agent Vasquez was thrashing against her restraints now, making desperate sounds through her gag. Not fear, warning. Bella caught the woman's eye and saw something that made her blood freeze. Maternal recognition. The look of one mother trying to protect another's child, even across the impossible divide of law and criminality. Carmen doesn't know, Bella realized aloud. She thinks this is real. You didn't tell an 8-year-old that her mother was undercover federal, that their entire life was a lie constructed to catch a criminal. You let her believe. The sound of splintering wood cut through her words. Front door, heavy boots, tactical entry. The cavalry had arrived, which meant her 20-minute timeline had just collapsed to seconds. Davidson's smile was sharp with triumph. Game over, Shadow. Time to... Bella moved like violence given form, diving left as automatic weapons fire chewed through the space where she'd been standing. The young agent's position behind the couch became his coffin as she rolled, came up running and opened his throat with surgical precision. Davidson was shouting commands, trying to coordinate with the entry team while tracking her movement through the chaos of overturned furniture and strobing tactical lights. But Bella wasn't trying to escape. She was moving toward Agent Vasquez, toward the one person in this nightmare who might actually care about Carmen's survival. The woman's eyes went wide as Bella dropped beside her, ceramic blades slicing through zip ties with practiced efficiency. "Where?" Bella hissed, hauling Vasquez upright as gunfire erupted around them. "Where is Rodriguez taking her?" "Safe house," Vasquez gasped, ripping away her gag. "Kendall. But he doesn't know. Bella, he doesn't know she's my daughter. Real daughter. The adoption was off books before the operation started." The world tilted on its axis. Carmen wasn't just bait, she was an agent's biological child, thrown into federal machinery that treated human assets like chess pieces. Rodriguez thought he was delivering intelligence to his handlers, not delivering a little girl into the hands of people who might eliminate loose ends to protect their operation. "How long?" Bella demanded, checking the magazine on a fallen agent's weapon. "Maybe less." Vasquez grabbed her arm with desperate strength. "She calls me Mama because that's what I am. Everything else, the marriage, the house, the surveillance, it was all cover. But Carmen is real." Bella looked into the face of a woman who'd spent months lying about everything except love, and saw herself 30 years ago, desperate, terrified, and praying for someone strong enough to make the nightmare stop. The choice crystallized with brutal simplicity. She could fight her way out, disappear into the Miami underground, and live to hunt another day. Or she could trust a federal agent and walk into what might be the most sophisticated trap in DEA history. "Then we go get her," Bella said, and felt the last pieces of La Sombra's armor fall away. The escape from Agent Vasquez's house became a masterclass in controlled chaos, federal training colliding with cartel precision, as they fought their way through 3 separate tactical teams positioned around the residential block. Bella moved like her mother's ghost made manifest, every calculated strike carrying 30 years of accumulated rage, while Vasquez proved that maternal desperation could transform even desk-bound intelligence officers into formidable allies. By the time they reached Bella's armored Range Rover 2 blocks away, Davidson's coordinated operation had devolved into emergency medical calls and damaged federal egos scattered across Coral Gables lawns. But the clock was their true enemy. Rodriguez had a 40-minute head start to the Kendall safe house, and Bella's betrayer knew every contingency protocol she'd ever developed. Worse, if the DEA handlers realized their operation was compromised, Carmen would transform from asset to liability in whatever cold calculation governed federal mathematics. "He doesn't know about the adoption," Vasquez repeated, as Bella navigated Miami traffic like a guided missile, running red lights with surgical precision. The paperwork was buried deep, processed through family court before I was recruited. "Carmen thinks I'm her biological mother, because that's what all the documents say." Bella processed this while weaving between late-night commuters, her mind mapping tactical scenarios faster than her speedometer climbed. "But you are her biological mother." "Yes." The cover story was that I was recently divorced, working as a paralegal, looking for stable housing in a good school district. Vasquez checked the magazine on the Glock they'd liberated during their escape. Perfect surveillance position for monitoring your movements, and Carmen's presence made the whole setup look authentic. Authentic. The word tasted like acid in Bella's mouth. "You used your own daughter as cover for a federal operation." "I used federal resources to give my daughter a better life than a junior agent's salary could provide." Vasquez's voice carried the defensive edge of someone who justified an impossible choice too many times. Private school, safe neighborhood, college fund contributions that came with my assignment pay. I told myself I was protecting her. Bella understood that particular lie, the story parents told themselves when survival required moral compromises. She'd built her entire existence around similar rationalizations, each violent choice justified by the protection it provided or the weakness it concealed. But those justifications crumbled when faced with an 8-year-old's tear-streaked face, asking why bad men were hurting her mama. "Rodriguez thinks he's delivering intelligence about my location and security protocols," Bella said, calculating distances while the Range Rover's engine screamed through residential streets. "Your handlers think they're about to interrogate the asset who helped them build their case against La Sombra. Neither side knows Carmen is your biological daughter, which means when they're done with her testimony, she becomes a witness who needs to disappear." Bella finished the thought with brutal clarity. Federal witness protection if we're lucky. A convenient accident if someone decides the operation requires cleaner endings. The Kendall Safe House occupied a nondescript commercial building between a laundromat and a tax preparation service, the kind of administrative anonymity that screamed federal budget allocation. Bella parked 3 blocks away, her tactical instincts finally confronting the magnitude of what they were attempting. This wasn't a cartel warehouse or a corrupt cop's personal residence. This was a federal facility, probably staffed with career agents and equipped with surveillance technology that would make her home security system look primitive. "How many handlers?" she asked while checking her remaining weapons. 2 ceramic blades, the liberated Glock, and a backup. 38 that had been her companion for 15 years. 3 assigned to my operation. Rodriguez makes 4, but if they've called for backup... Vasquez's voice carried the weight of someone calculating impossible odds. "Then we're walking into a kill box designed specifically for me." Bella looked at the woman beside her, seeing 30 years of parallel choices reflected in another mother's desperate eyes. "You could walk away, call your superiors, claim you were taken hostage, let them sort out Carmen's situation through proper channels." Vasquez's laugh was sharp with bitter understanding. Proper channels that see an 8-year-old as a security risk instead of a child? Federal machinery that processes traumatized witnesses like case file numbers? She shook her head. "I've spent 8 months watching you through surveillance equipment, Isabella. I know what you become when someone threatens what you care about." The truth settled between them like a loaded weapon. They were both mothers who'd made impossible choices, both women who'd discovered that love and violence weren't opposites but strange companions in a world that offered few alternatives. The federal agent and the cartel enforcer, united by the recognition that sometimes the system designed to protect the innocent was the greatest threat they faced. "Then we end this," Bella said, and stepped into the Miami darkness carrying nothing but weapons and the terrible hope that redemption might be possible even for hands stained with irredeemable blood. The safe house waited ahead, containing either salvation or the final confirmation that some sins were too heavy for any mercy to lift. The safe house surveillance cameras had been watching them for 3 blocks. Bella caught the telltale glint of infrared illuminators, reflecting off her windshield as they made the final approach. Her 15 years of paranoia recognizing federal observation equipment like a native language, which meant Rodriguez hadn't just delivered Carmen to his handlers. He'd provided detailed intelligence about Bella's response patterns, her rescue protocols, even her emotional breaking points. "They know we're coming," she said, killing the Range Rover's headlights 2 blocks out. "This isn't a raid anymore. It's an execution." Vasquez followed her gaze to the building's roofline, where tactical antennas clustered like metallic flowers against the Miami skyline. Counter-surveillance equipment. They're not just watching, they're recording everything for evidence. Whatever happens in there becomes part of the permanent federal record. The implications crystallized with sickening clarity. Carmen wasn't being debriefed. She was being processed as a witness in a case that required La Sombra's capture or death to reach its conclusion. Every question they asked the girl, every tear she shed, was being documented for future prosecution. And when the case closed, the 8-year-old who'd seen too much would need to disappear into whatever bureaucratic machinery handled inconvenient truths. Bella's phone buzzed against her hip. Text message. Unknown number. Shadow. Time to come home. The little bird is asking for her mama. Both of them. R. Rodriguez's message carried the smug satisfaction of a man who'd finally cornered his obsession. But beneath the surface taunt, Bella detected something else: professional pride. Her lieutenant wasn't just betraying her for federal immunity or cartel money, he was demonstrating tactical superiority, proving that his strategic mind had finally surpassed the legendary La Sombra's legendary instincts. "He's in full control," Bella whispered, showing Vasquez the message. "Carmen, the federal operation, even our response. Rodriguez has been orchestrating this entire scenario from the beginning." Understanding dawned in Vasquez's eyes like horror made manifest. The domestic violence call, Carmen running to your house, the timing, the location, none of it was coincidence. He knew exactly which emotional triggers would make you abandon 30 years of security protocols. Bella's hands tightened on the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. Rodriguez had studied her like a laboratory specimen, mapping every psychological vulnerability until he found the one weakness that could transform an apex predator into a desperate mother. The bastard had probably been planning this manipulation for months, waiting for the perfect federal operation to provide the necessary cover. Another text arrived. This one included a photograph. Carmen sat in a metal folding chair, her small hands cuffed to the armrests with zip ties sized for adult wrists. Her tear-streaked face was turned toward the camera with the bewildered terror of a child who'd discovered that adults were capable of unimaginable cruelty. Behind her, Rodriguez's familiar profile was visible in the frame's edge, his expression carrying the satisfaction of a chess master revealing his final gambit. But it was the figure in the background that made Bella's blood turn to ice water. Agent Davidson, supposedly dead from their confrontation at Vasquez's house, stood upright and uninjured beside a bank of monitoring equipment. His tactical vest was pristine, unmarked by the violence that had torn through the residential staging area. "Kevlar," Vasquez breathed, recognizing the implications. "You hit him center mass, but he was wearing level 4 protection under his shirt. Everything at the house, the gunfight, the casualties, our escape, it was all theater." Bella's legendary tactical instincts crumbled like sand castles before an incoming tide. Every decision she'd made, every move she'd calculated, every moment of maternal desperation had been anticipated and manipulated by federal minds that understood her better than she understood herself. The ceramic blades that had felt like extensions of her will were toys against opponents who'd studied her techniques for 8 months. The rescue mission that had felt like redemption was actually the final chapter of her destruction. "They have everything," she said, her voice hollow with the recognition of complete defeat. "Carmen, you, me. Rodriguez's intelligence, Davidson's operation, 8 months of documented evidence. We're not walking into a trap. We're delivering ourselves to federal prosecution with gift wrapping." Her phone buzzed one final time. Another message from Rodriguez, this one containing only an address and a timestamp, 30 minutes. "Come alone, or the little bird learns what happens to inconvenient witnesses." Vasquez grabbed her arm with desperate strength. We can still call for backup. Other agents, Miami PD, someone who can... Who can what? Bella's laugh was sharp with bitter understanding. Arrest me? Protect Carmen from the same federal machinery that put her in this position? There is no cavalry coming, Agent Vasquez. There's only us walking into the culmination of our own destruction. She looked at the safe house through her windshield, seeing not a building but a tomb. Somewhere inside, an 8-year-old girl was learning that monsters weren't creatures who hid under beds. They were the adults who pretended to protect children while using them as weapons. La Sombra was finished. The only question remaining was whether Isabella Morales could die in a way that might save one innocent soul from the wreckage of her choices.